Nightfall, the calm before the storm. Rain lashed against the windows. Wind howled like a banshee.
Sarah huddled deeper into the armchair, a book clasped in her hand. The words blurred, her mind restless. The old house creaked and groaned around her, a symphony of unsettling sounds. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 11 times, its deep resonant tones echoing in the silence. Sarah shivered, pulling a throw blanket tighter around her shoulders. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. She glanced at the TV, the flickering light casting dancing shadows on the walls. A news report played silently, images of a storm raging across the country. Power outages, fallen trees, flash floods. The reporter's voice, frantic and high-pitched, sent a tremor of unease through her. Sarah reached for the remote, turning the volume down. The silence returned, heavier now, pregnant with anticipation. A low rumble of thunder echoed in the distance, a reminder of the storm brewing both outside and within her.
She tried to focus on her book, but the words swam before her eyes. An unsettling feeling prickled at the back of her neck, a sense of being watched. The wind howled again, rattling the windows in their frames. The shadows in the room seemed to deepen, twisting and contorting in the flickering firelight. A floorboard creaked upstairs.
Sarah froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The house was old, prone to settling and groaning, but this sound was different. It was a slow, deliberate creak, as if someone was moving cautiously across the floor. She strained to listen, her breath catching in her throat. Silence. Perhaps it was just her imagination, her nerves on edge. The news report had mentioned power outages in the area. What if someone was trying to break in? Fear coiled in her stomach, cold and tight. She wished Charlie was home. He was supposed to be back hours ago. Where was he?
A sharp knock on the door made her jump. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She wasn't expecting anyone. Not in this weather. Not at this hour. Hello?
Her voice came out a shaky whisper. Silence. She waited, holding her breath. But the only sound was the incessant drumming of the rain. Maybe it was just a branch tossed by the wind, or some kids playing a prank. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. Just as she was about to turn away, the knock came again, more insistent this time. A shiver ran down her spine.
Who is it?
Open the door, Sarah.
Terror froze her in place. How did he know her name? Her hand trembled as she reached for the phone, her finger hovering over the 911 button. Before she could press it, the doorknob rattled violently. Someone was trying to force their way in. She backed away, her pulse quickening with each passing second. Panic threatened to consume her.
Go away!
She screamed, her voice cracking with fear. The doorknob stopped rattling. Silence descended upon the house once more, thick and heavy. She waited, holding her breath, but the only sound was the relentless pounding of her heart. Had he gone? Or was he just waiting for the right moment to strike? She crept closer to the window, peering out into the storm-ravaged night. The streetlights flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows that concealed more than they revealed. A movement in the shadows across the street caught her eye. A tall, shadowy figure, barely discernible in the darkness, stood watching the house.
Hello?
Sarah, it's Charlie.
Charlie, where are you? I've been worried sick.
Listen, don't let anyone in. Don't trust anyone.
What? What are you talking about?
He's here, Sarah. He's looking for me.
Who is? What's going on?
The line went dead. Static hissed in her ear. She tried calling back, but all she got was the automated voice informing her that the number was no longer in service. Panic surged through her. Charlie was in danger. But from whom? And what did he mean? He's here. A crash from upstairs sent her scrambling back from the window. Someone was inside the house. Her heart pounded in her chest, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. She had to hide, but where? Adrenaline surged through her veins. She darted into the kitchen, her eyes scanning the room for a potential hiding place. The basement door gaped open at the far end of the room, a gaping maw of darkness. No, she couldn't go down there. It was too dark, too exposed. Her eyes fell on the pantry, a small, cramped space tucked away under the stairs. It wouldn't offer much protection, but it was better than nothing. She slipped inside, pulling the door shut behind her. The air hung heavy and still, thick with the scent of spices and forgotten preserves. She huddled in the darkness, listening for any sound, any indication of the intruder's whereabouts. Footsteps creaked on the floorboards outside, slow, deliberate, getting closer. He was checking each room methodically, patiently, hunting her.
He stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed against the faint light filtering in from the living room. He was tall and imposing, his features obscured by the shadows. In his hand, he held a long glinting object. A knife? "Come out, Sarah!" His voice was a low growl, sending shivers down her spine. "I know you're in there."
He took a step closer, his boots thudding heavily on the hardwood floor. She pressed herself further back into the shadows, her hand clutching the phone like a lifeline.
"What do you want?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the pounding of her heart.
"Your brother?" He chuckled, a chilling sound that sent goosebumps erupting across her skin. "He owes me something."
He took another step closer and she could see his face now, partially illuminated by the flickering light from the hallway. His features were sharp and angular, his eyes cold and calculating. But it was his smile that terrified her the most, a cruel, predatory grin that spoke of unimaginable horrors. A deafening crash from upstairs echoed through the house. He froze, his head snapping up towards the source of the noise. Distraction. This was her chance. She threw open the pantry door and bolted, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear him moving behind her, his heavy footsteps pounding on the floorboards like a death knell. She raced through the living room, her lungs burning, her legs screaming for respite. He was gaining on her. She could feel his hot breath on her neck, his presence looming large behind her. She flung open the front door and stumbled out into the storm, rain lashing at her face, wind whipping her hair around her head. She didn't dare look back. She didn't need to. She could hear him close behind, his laughter echoing through the night, a chilling symphony of madness. She didn't stop running until she reached the sanctuary of the old oak tree at the edge of the woods. She collapsed against its trunk, gasping for breath, her body trembling uncontrollably. When she finally dared to look back, the street was empty. The house stood silent and dark. The only movement the flickering shadows cast by the streetlights. He was gone. The police arrived soon after. Sirens wailing in the night, their flashing lights painting the street in hues of red and blue. They listened patiently to her story, their faces etched with a mixture of skepticism and concern. They searched the house, but found no sign of forced entry, no evidence of an intruder. They chalked it up to a case of nerves. A young woman home alone on a stormy night, her imagination running wild. But Sarah knew what she had seen. She knew what she had heard, and she knew deep down that he was still out there, somewhere, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again. The police left and she was alone once more, alone with her fear, her doubts, and the chilling memory of the visitor who had haunted her night. She tried to piece together what had happened, but the more she thought about it, the less sense it made.
Who was that man? What did he want with Charlie? And where was her brother now?
Days turned into weeks, and the weeks stretched into months. Life went on, but the memory of that night lingered, a dark cloud hanging over her life. She still hadn't heard from Charlie. The police had no leads, no answers. He had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a void that ached in her chest. She tried to move on, to convince herself that it had all been a bad dream, a figment of her overactive imagination. But deep down, a part of her knew better. The fear remained a constant companion, whispering doubts in her ear, casting shadows on her every thought. She was no longer the carefree young woman she had once been. The visitor had taken something from her that night, something precious and irreplaceable. And as the sun began to set, casting long, ominous shadows across the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. That somewhere, out there in the darkness, he was waiting, watching, and waiting for the right moment to return.